So we're in the Sermon on the Mount, and we've been talking about this idea of what we couldn't do, right? The idea is Jesus is fulfilling what we couldn't. So the whole Old Testament is this story of God trying to have a relationship with his people and his people falling short. So Jesus comes as prophesied to kind of change things, to redirect things. And part of that is to prove that God's way is the right way, that it is attainable, that it is right, that you can live up to it. And so Jesus is living up to the commandments of God. And so that's part of the significance of his sinlessness, part of the significance of who he was while he was here. And we've seen that in these parallels that Matthew has created with the Old Testament. His baptism mirroring the crossing of the Red Sea, the 40 days of fasting in the wilderness, like the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, all these sorts of things. And the Sermon on the Mount is the giving of the law. It's like Moses on Sinai delivering the law. And what he's doing is he is interpreting the law in some ways and saying, this is what it was really about. You've heard it said, but I say unto you. So that's really kind of the heart of chapter 5. Chapter 6, he gets a little bit more specific with a few things. This heart issue that he has. And he talks specifically about caring about your relationship with God more than the way that you're perceived by others, which is a poignant and challenging sort of thing to say, right? Because we all care what other people think about us. And maybe sometimes the people amongst us who seem to care the least actually care the most. I remember when I was in 6th grade, I had a teacher who said that she had read in the newspaper about this story about this guy who was a grown man and he was considering suicide. And he found this thing from when he was in elementary school of all the nice things that people had written about him. And it was like this activity that the teacher had done. And he read these things and decided that his life was worth living after all. So she was like, so we're going to do that. So she hands out the paper and we all write things. Well, 6th graders aren't very nice. And my paper, I still have it, is littered with, I like how you don't care what people think about you, which is so depressing and heartbreaking when I think back on it. It was like all girls. There were 3 boys in that class and like 16 girls. And all 16 girls wrote, I like how you don't care what people think about you. And that's like, oh boy. But of course, that was the persona I wanted to have. I don't care what you think. But I mean, I cared more than anybody. That's why I pretended like I don't care. It's like my dad always said, don't let him see you cry, son, right? So you're still not letting him see you cry. But, it's this sort of thing, right? Like we care what people think. And Jesus is saying that's not what matters. It's what God sees and how God views you, right? So it's when you pray, don't lift your hands to heaven and glorify yourself for the sake of other people. You really should be the person who bows humbly to the Lord asking for forgiveness. And this kind of transcends into our entire perspective on life, which he finishes up with the anxiety question, right? Not being anxious for anything because we see something a little bit different. Look, tomorrow's got enough problems. God only asks that we focus on today and make the best choice we can today. Transitioning then into chapter 7, he continues this idea of what really matters in our perspective. And he talks about this idea of judge not that you not be judged, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you will use, it will be measured against you, these sort of things, right? The speck and the plank, we're very familiar with that. And the idea, of course, is not that you can't judge. Everything requires judgment, discernment. Every choice we make is some sort of judgment in one way or another. The point is simply make sure that you are very clear about what your measure of judgment is. Be very clear the standard that you use to evaluate things. Because if you want to be harsh and hypercritical on others, you better be prepared for people to be hypercritical on you, right? If you invite criticism on others, then you're inviting criticism on yourself. But it isn't just this sort of like worldly wisdom sort of stuff, right? This is divine in nature. The way that you view others and the empathy and the consideration and more specifically the forgiveness you give others, that's a statement of your heart. And that's what God cares about. And if your heart is not pure in your relationship towards others, then, the Lord will evaluate that as well. And then we get into verse 7, where he says, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks it will be opened. Or which one of you, if a son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? What's that mean? What's he talking about? If you seek the buried treasure, you'll find it, right? What's he mean? I was kind of making a joke. Sorry, talked too much at the beginning. Yeah, Derek. Yeah. Yep, I think so. Wisdom comes from God. Yeah. And this goes back to what he says in chapter 6, right? Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added unto you. And he comes back to that idea of seeking God, knocking, asking. Right. Pursuing God, and you will find him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, maybe there's some sort of progression there in terms of like the effort, this kind of growth that takes place. Why do you think he emphasizes both at the end of chapter 6 and then here, asking, seeking, knocking, like that sort of thing? Like why those words? Why that point of emphasis? Like, I mean, of all the things that Jesus could have said, right? Of all the ways that you could talk about like finding God or forgiveness or talking about prayer some more like he did in chapter 6. Of all the things he could say, why do you think he goes back to this idea of seeking? Why do you think that's the choice here? Like what specifically does it conjure up? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the accessibility thing is a big deal. If you tried to get in contact with the President of the United States, do you think your persistence would pay off? I mean, maybe yours would. Mine wouldn't. I mean, there's not a chance in the world that my persistence in that area would pay off. President of France or the King of England, which I still think it's weird that they have a king. There's something that's like particularly striking to me about them having a king versus a queen. I don't know, but they have a king. Good for them, I guess. Glad we're independent from them. But you think about that, like this idea of like accessibility, like people of power. Can you get in contact with them? And it's not even really like you go to the height of society and we recognize it, but it's like, could I get in contact with the CEO of my company? No, there's not a chance. If I emailed that guy, I'd probably get fired. He would contact the department head, and then he would contact his boss, and that boss would reach out to my boss. And next thing you know, they're like, "What are you doing?" And I would never hear from him, right? You work for a major corporation, like they don't want you to talk to them. Like that's not the way that this works, right? And we just recognize that there's barriers in society. There's as much as we pretend like we have social maneuverability, and we may have it compared to other societies in the history of the world, we still have our castes, right? Like we still have our levels of society that it is hard to break through. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the exact sort of prophetic message of Ezekiel 34. Like these intermediaries, these priests, these kings, that didn't work. You had bad leaders who misled you. You went down the wrong path, and so you know what? God says, I'm going to do something different. You're no longer going to have these bad shepherds because I will be your shepherd. I will be there with you. And that's what Jesus comes and says. And if you seek him, you'll find him. But the other part of that isn't just the accessibility and this amazing message of like actually being able to find God and connect to him. It's this pursuit idea. He doesn't say, like the way he says this is that you seek, you knock, you ask, right? You search for. And that's a huge part of what the New Testament message is all about, right? The pursuit of your heart. Pursuing God and pursuing his righteousness. Hunger and thirsting for righteousness, as we saw in the Beatitudes. But like this pursuit towards God is what matters. That's what he wants, is he wants us to try and find him. And if you do, you will. And that's the other side of it. But I think a huge part of this is recognizing that there's a directional force that we should have in our lives towards God. Yeah, Rick. Right. Yep. Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a big deal that God himself, in the form of the Son, is here speaking to humans face to face, saying, if you seek him, you'll find him. And he goes on and he says, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. And this is by extension a little bit of this seeking language, isn't it? If you're seeking something in your life, then you need to convey that. And it's natural, right? Like we understand this, the golden rule. I mean, kindergarten classes across America, whether they are Christian-based or not, have, do unto others, right? Maybe not do unto anymore. That's probably a little bit antiquated. But this idea of the golden rule is something that exists because we recognize some sort of cosmic karma, just naturally as humans. But here, it's not cosmic. It's not karma. It is the commands of God that you seek him and you will find him. You pursue peace, you will find peace. And so it's an extension of not just achieving his kingdom and his righteousness in this broad sense, but also the value system of God. You pursue the values of God, you will find them. And it may not be today, tomorrow, or the next day, but eternally, right? You pursue the character of God, you find the character of God. You pursue his wisdom and his righteousness, you will find his wisdom and his righteousness. He will give those things to you. You need but seek for them, ask for them, knock and pursue them. Yeah. 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 Yeah, this is a great reference there. And that is the message of the gospel. God is not far away, and you can find him and you can connect with him. But there's this caution to it as well. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. This is a truism. This isn't him saying, I only want to save a few people. I only want the select few to make it, and I'm going to push through the crowds and only pick out the best of the best. Like, that's not what he's saying. What he is saying is a truism. The nature of it is most people are not willing to seek these things. Most people are not willing to pursue God. Most people are not willing to suffer for the cause of God and Jesus and righteousness, right? Like, there's a cost to these things. There's a pursuit to these things, and it requires effort, and it requires steadfastness, and it requires faithfulness. And most people aren't up for the challenge. They just aren't. It takes something different. It is few that will find it. Not because God is far away, because if you seek him, you'll find him. It's not God's fault that there are few. It's our fault. It's our own inability to stay steadfast and to remain focused. I mean, silly example. I mentioned before I started playing guitar in earnest, maybe about a year ago. Megan encouraged me to take lessons so that I would have a friend. So I pay this guy to be my friend for 30 minutes once a week and teach me guitar. It says something that my only friend berates me for 30 minutes and says, well, if you want to pay for the lesson twice, that's on you, right? Which is fair. Because what happens is he gives you a lesson, he says, practice this, and you go home, and you're like, I'll practice it tomorrow. And it's like, you're paying the guy, right? And you're playing the guitar. You're like, I'm playing every day. But are you practicing the new skill the next little bit? I got to learn scales, right? It's the worst thing ever. I don't want to learn the scales, but it's part of that progression of what you have to do. And you have to sit there, and there's no shortcut. You memorize them, and you play them. A lot of people don't do that. The statistics are crazy. It's like 90% of people quit playing the guitar in the first year of trying to play the guitar. And it's like it goes up even past that. And I haven't made it to a year on lessons yet, so I don't know that I'm in the 10%. Like, I'm getting close, and I've thought about canceling. So, it says something. I chose to pursue the guitar. I like playing the guitar. I enjoy it, right? I've invested money. I've, pursued it. And yet, am I going to continue to grow and get better at it? Now you start talking about the way that you live and your value system and pursuing God day in and day out as you're surrounded by people who think differently, act differently, live differently. Narrow is the way. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the narrow gate is not supposed to be discouraging, right? I don't know that he says that in the way of you're probably not going to make it anyway. So only a few are going to make it. I mean, I think the point is, there's a steadfastness required. There's an effort and a seeking that's required. And I think he's trying to evaluate that. And your point about the judgment, I think, is part of that. What are you pursuing? Because it's really easy, go back to the silly guitar analogy, right? You go to a guitar store and you look at the guitars and you want to, play them. You're buying some strings, but it's well, I'm here. I might as well play the $10,000 guitar, if they're going to let me. And you start playing it, but then you see the other people playing guitar. So now it's now I've got to perform and I've got to make sure that I'm better. And if you go and there's people there that aren't very good and they're playing, struggling to play a couple chords, you're I'm pretty good at the guitar. But then you go on YouTube and you start looking up videos of people playing, you're I'm terrible, right? And so this constant evaluation to others is not healthy in terms of your own personal pursuit and enjoyment. I have found that I just enjoy playing a G chord sometimes, and I'll sit in my room and just strum a G chord for 10 minutes. Is it silly? Yeah. Is it easy? Yeah. But I enjoy it. Does that change anything else for anybody else? And I think that that's part of this judgment thing, is that you seek God. And when you look around and you're pursuing God and you're pursuing his righteousness, that should affect the way that you view others, but it should also affect the way that you compare yourself to others as part of that lesson too. It isn't about other people as much as it is your pursuit of God and being on board with those that are pursuing God. Yeah, Ian. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why there's the threefold repetition, perhaps a progression here. Seek, ask, knock, right? Like you are pursuing this. This is what you're striving for. And I think that's what he's getting at. I think that's right. But he gives this other kind of warning. Beware of false prophets, verse 15, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. This is like in the Old Testament, where there's a test for the prophets. Well, if they say something and they prophesy something's going to happen, just wait and see. If it comes true, then maybe they were a prophet of God. If it doesn't, then they weren't. Like there's a test, and here's the test by which you evaluate the people that are around you that are injecting themselves into your lives. What kind of fruit are they bearing? Are they an apple tree? You know, because if they're an apple tree, there's apples on the branches. And if there's not apples on the branches, then cut it down. You know, plant one that's actually going to grow the apples that you need. Like that's the test, and it's simple. You can't fake it, right? You can't fake the fruits of what they're doing. What is the effect of the way that they live their life? And it's kind of the way that Paul writes the qualifications for elders, is it not? How do they live is what he's saying. Are they hospitable? Are they in a faithful relationship? What are their kids like? Have they raised their kids faithfully? Like you can look at somebody and evaluate whether or not they are consistent with God's word or not. And it's not necessarily by having them answer a bunch of questions on a questionnaire. It's look at their life. See the sort of people that they are and the way they interact with others and the way they interact with the brotherhood. There's a test for this. And this is important because as you are pursuing God, there will be people who come around and will say all sorts of things. This is what we're talking about in the book of Colossians, right? On Wednesday nights. They'll come in, they'll have plausible arguments, right? Which is an interesting phrase. They'll be reasonable. They'll be persuasive. They'll have all sorts of interesting things to say. But what's the test? Who are they? What kind of fruit are they bearing?
Bearing fruit. I still have to bear fruit my whole life. There is no retirement. There is no, my end game is my death. It is a lifelong pursuit.
Which your death is then an opportunity to be transformed to eternally bear fruit. It's not that it stops then. And I like what you're saying and the way you articulate that. I've heard this a lot. When we were out of town, I heard a fella say this. At the Lord's Supper talking about sin, you know, and like continue to sin, you know, and I'll probably never stop sinning, you know, and that's fair. Maybe that's the case, but that's a little bit of the wrong question, I think. It's not necessarily about the specific sin and whether or not you have completely licked sin, because maybe you're not sinning, right? Maybe you're not committing adultery and you're not lying, but are you bearing fruit? And I think that there's a slight difference in pursuit there. Am I going to stop these things or am I going to continue to produce these other things? And both need to happen, right? Sin is sin. You need to cut it out of your life. But I also think that a huge part of our focus needs to be this bearing fruit and pursuing God in the way that we live. And like Michael said, that's a never-ending pursuit. That's something we always do. There's always ways to be better at it. There's always ways to improve in the way that we bear fruit and affect others. Understand things differently, teach differently, communicate differently, have more patience, have more kindness within us. I mean, those are things that we don't like to talk about because there's no clear line on patience, you know? Like, how do you define whether or not you're patient enough with your children? I mean, is patience good enough when it's like 5, 6, 7 times, 10 times, 12 times? You know, like, Like those sorts of lines and delineations are the problem, is that we want to, it's easy to try and mark specifically when we've attained, when we've stepped away from sin and are righteous, but that's not really what God wants, which is why narrow is the way, because we are constantly pursuing. And I think part of what matters then isn't necessarily what you have attained, it's what you're pursuing. Yeah. Yeah. And I think about this all the time. It is directional, what we are pursuing and who we're becoming. That's what God cares about. He doesn't look at somebody who was baptized yesterday and is a struggling alcoholic and think, oh, they relapsed. That's it. Right? There is grace in God. It's the pursuit, right? It is the constant effort to become better that he cares about. It doesn't mean that you can all of a sudden get drunk and it's okay, that that's not sinful. The point is the pursuit of what you're trying to attain. Are you in Christ and are you pursuing Christ is the question. And so, someone like me is evaluated differently than somebody who is just figuring out Christianity and values for the first time. Baptized a long time ago, been preaching for a while, been reading my Bible quite a bit. I had better be further down the line of pursuing the fruit of the Spirit than somebody who has just figured out that the fruit of the Spirit exists. It isn't that there's a double standard, it's that there's a pursuit and a change that takes place in us. And hopefully we can look at our lives and see the effects of that pursuit in the way that we are. Look, I'm as flawed as anybody. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I am the paragon of righteousness or something like that. I mean, I am abundantly aware of all my foibles and flaws and sins and whatever else word you want to give them. But I also will attest to you that I can look back on my life and say, you know what? I don't have the temper that I once had. Still have a little bit of a temper, still working on it. Ask my wife. When we were dating, I was way more angry than I am today. And I'm proud of that I have pursued to be less angry, right? Doesn't mean that I've attained. I'm waiting for that day in which God will complete the work that he began in me, right? The way that Paul says in Philippians 1. But it is the pursuit that matters, and it is a never-ending pursuit. And some people look at that and they say, I just can't. Man, that sounds exhausting. And other people say, no, I'm all in. I will put one foot in front of the other and I will trudge forward. And that is the narrow way, and that's why it is difficult, because it is constant improvement in pursuit of God. That's what we need to see. And you recognize that by the fruit that you bear. And you evaluate the people that are teaching you by the fruit that they bear, right? How are they affecting the world around about them? That's the test that he gives. And he says, you know, as a response to that, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. What was their mistake? Why are these people not allowed to enter into heaven? Right. I think that's exactly right. Like there are those who will say, Lord, Lord, look what I've done. I've done all these great things. And he says, you gave up a long time ago. I mean, that's the hard reality of the pursuit of Christianity. It is a constant effort, yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I think that that's part of the difficulty here in the transition, because you would say, well, they're bearing good fruit, right? The demons are cast out. These people have been taken care of. And so like, yeah, that's good fruit. And it's like, yeah, but there's this other side of it, right? It isn't what you did, it's what God did. And it's what you're pursuing and how hard you're pursuing it. And it isn't just about one or two things, right? That you may or may not have done. It is this pursuit and this effort of who you are, yeah. Right. Which goes back to the judgment thing, right? Look around, I'm pretty good, doing all right. We play those games all the time, financially, guitar playing, whatever it is. You look around, you're like, I'm doing pretty good. But are you? Could you do better? Should you be doing better? There's a pursuit there. Yeah. Was there anything? Right. Which begs the question, what is the will of God? Because I think it's easy to get this wrong sometimes. Is the will of God to, use the phrase again, check the boxes, to know all the rules and all the laws and to keep them? What is the will of God? Yeah, to be like Him. Yeah. Yeah.
For a moment, forgot God in that equation. He forgot to consider God. God said, because you did that, you can't enter that race. He wants to know us, and He wants us to know Him. That's the connection.
And if you know Him, yeah, if you know Him, you'll be like Him. Because you care, because you value those things and you've embodied those things. I mean, so I've thought about writing a sermon on this. I'll try and make this very succinct. It's like the Bible authority question, right? Like, why does Bible authority matter? And hopefully, it matters because there's this honest pursuit within us to know God as best we can and to serve Him as best we can. And so, we study the Word to figure it out. We make choices all the time in our assemblies and in our lives about what to do because you're confronted with them. So how do you make a determination on what choice you're going to make? That's the question. How do you decide those things? And so we've just had a class on Bible authority. The idea that we have here is we will read the Bible and figure it out. And some people say, well, you can't use letters to create a systematic theology. And it's like, well, maybe that's not what they were intended for, but we still have a choice to make. And how are we going to make the decision on what we're going to do? And so that's the pursuit, right? That we are going to carefully pursue as best and accurately we can the things of God. But that isn't to say that because we have figured out that these are the things that the Bible seems to illustrate and we've done them that we're saved. It's the two together, right? It is the pursuit of God and it is the earnest heart of faith and understanding the will of God and constantly pursuing it that matters. And it's out of that heart that we come to questions of Bible authority and how to read things and how to study things and how to assemble together and what that looks like. It is the earnest pursuit of God that hopefully leads to those things, that then makes our determination and is the thing that then is what puts us into Christ, is that we know Him and we've pursued Him. And these are the decisions that we've made in that effort. And this is the most remarkable thing to me about the entire Sermon on the Mount. And it's contextual, right? You're there, you're one of these poor, meek people who's been put upon their entire lives, and you're hungry and you're thirsty, and you hear that there's this guy who's healing people and doing these things, and you want to hear him and you want to see him. And he gets up and he starts speaking. And you're listening to this and you're like mesmerized. You don't really know what it means, but you're fascinated by it. I mean, I've read this Sermon on the Mount so many times, sometimes I wonder if I know what it means. But like, you hear it and you're listening, and then he finishes this way. Verse 24. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it didn't fail because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. What is he saying? What I say. I mean, these words of mine. Listen to what I say. He started with the law, chapter 5. You've heard it said. Well, it wasn't said, it was written. It was inscribed in the hearts of the children of Israel with blood as God descended in thunder and lightning on the mountain, and He was delivered this law to them. Like, you've heard it said, but I say unto you, this is what it was really about. I have the ability to interpret these things differently. I know, and I'm telling you what you're supposed to be, who you're supposed to be. And if you listen to me and you do what I say, your house will be built on the rock. It's pretty incredible.
Personal responsibility that comes across in that sentence is incredible. Not only from his part, but also from our part. He's holding us, he's holding you, holding me, holding accountable for what he said. It's not like, oh, I get the congregation to help. I get here, there, judgment day. He's going to be looking at me personally. He's going to be saying, here's what I told you. What did you do? And the lifelong pursuit, the discernment to keep it pure is going to be vitally important.
And here's the scary thing that Michael implied, but I'll say it. We have now heard those words. Like, we are now accountable for those words because we have heard them. That's the scary thing, isn't it? But if we heed Him and we pursue Him, be like the man who built his house on the rock. And our faithfulness will remain, and the way that we are taken care of by God will remain, right? We will stand fast because it's built upon the things that Jesus said. But I mean, it's no wonder then, right, that He concludes this way, and then it says, when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at His teaching. Astonished. For He was teaching them as one who had authority, not as their scribes. Have you ever been in a class, high school class, college class, whatever, where there's a professor who literally wrote the textbook on the material you're talking about? And people ask him questions, and he doesn't have any notes. All he has is his marker or his piece of chalk. And whatever you ask him, he'll draw something on the board. He'll write it. It's the master of his domain. You know what I mean? I had a sports econ professor who wrote the book on sports economics. It was the one textbook at the time that I think was specifically written on sports economics. And so this guy starts talking about stuff he knows what he's talking about. You know what I mean? He's drawing the models. He's talking about, he has all these personal illustrations of being called by cities and governments to evaluate on things. Like, this is the guy, you know, pretty impressive. See that. But that's just sports economics, you know, pretty cool. Most of you all probably don't care. I mean, I guess the Rays just were sold, I heard. So maybe we care a little bit. I don't know. They're in St. Pete. I don't know. But this is life. All things pertaining to life and godliness and who you are. And this is authority on all of that. And you look at him and you hear him talk. He's not trying to like figure out what to say. He's not like up there, well, you know, I don't want to offend people, or is this the right analogy, or is this going to be, is this really the truth? You know, am I understanding this correctly? I'm going to avoid that topic, right? I'm just not going to touch that one. I got to figure some more about that out, right? Which is, when I write sermons all the time, half the time you shelve them and you're like, I'll come back to it later, and you never come back to them because you're like, I haven't figured it out yet, right? Like, I haven't figured out how to preach that sermon. I don't quite understand that passage or that topic or that direction I was going. Or sometimes you're like, I really want to preach this sermon, and then you start writing it and you read the Bible and you're like, yeah, that's not the sermon that I should preach, and it ends up something completely different as you're you know, because we are in submission to God and His Word and all these things. But here's Jesus standing before them proclaiming truth. And it isn't just that He says, listen to these words of mine, so you can feel it, the truth of it, right? There is a truth to the message of God and to the Sermon on the Mount that I think we recognize. There is a truism about the rich man raising his hands to heaven versus the poor man who's like bowing down in grief before God. There's a truth to that we recognize. There is a truth to narrow is the way. I mean, you look at the world, you see the things that people value, you see the direction of it, and you just see the truth of it, right? You just see it. And here He is proclaiming that truth and articulating it, and you recognize it and you go away astonished. Because this is different. This is life-changing. This isn't a scribe. This isn't somebody studying somebody else's textbook. This is the master, right? And He's articulating these things to me. And this is significant because it is a huge part of what this gospel story is all about. So there are five times that this phrase is basically used in the Gospel of Matthew, where He says something like, when Jesus finished these sayings, right? There's like 5 kind of sermons that He uses this in. Matthew 13, Matthew 24, I think Matthew 10, another one, Matthew 18, should have written them down. But He uses this 5 times, and each one of those 5 is basically at the end of one of these discourses. And so you can read into that as much as you want. But based on the way that we've talked about this, coming in, talking about the fulfillment, what we couldn't do, some argue that this represents the 5 books of the law, right? That He is giving them a new law, that His life is this new law. So there's these significant moments where He teaches to them. But the real idea is that He's changing these things. And we're going to get into chapter 8. I'll say this quickly because we should have covered all of chapter 8 today. We're pretty far behind already. But the first 2 stories here, He cleanses a leper. And then He cleanses a centurion, slave. And it shows this message of healing the people of Israel, but also healing those that are outside. And there's this kind of beautiful thing that Jesus is doing here in this gospel. So appreciate your kind attention and your comments. We'll try and blitz through as best we can going forward.